Masechet Yoma, Daf 74. We have three topics today. The first one is linguistic. The word asur in the Mishnah. Why does it say the word asur regarding the five inuyim when it should say chayav? Since at least for eating and drinking, a person is chayav karet. So usually asur means patur bal asur. And we saw already one answer, which is talking about chatzi shiur. We're going to see another answer as to the Sud is talking about the other four. Then we'll see the reasons for half shiur, according to the one who says it's not allowed. Why is half a shiur not allowed? Or why is it permitted? If it is permitted, that's machloket, the Yochanan and Resh Lakish. And the third part, we'll talk about how about other ways to suffer. There's not only 5 ways to suffer. You could think of other things like sitting in the sun and getting very hot. So how come you don't make people suffer? And we'll see 4 different responses why those don't count, or rather only eating and drinking and the rest that are, that's the main one, and the rest that are on the list. Okay, so we begin with just reminding ourselves. The Mishnah said here, Yom Kippurim asur ba'achila b'shtiyah and the rest of them. And so why not say chayav? So our first, the real answer, which is the second answer, is much simpler. Is that the word asur is going on the other 4. So only someone who eats and drinks would be chayav karet. The other 4 are not chayav karet. They're patur aval asur. They're prohibited midoraita. I mean, you can tell that because we do learn it from a drasha. So I think that's the original Tannaitic opinion. But since there's no prohibition, it does make sense. It does make sense to say the word asur for the whole group because of those 4. But anyway, that'll be the second answer. We don't know that right now. So the first answer is it's saying asur because we're talking about chatzi shiur, which is anything less than a full shiur. If you eat less than a date size of food, then it's not allowed, but there's no punishment. And so for that, it says asur. Okay, so now we mentioned that makes sense according to the Yochanan, because the Yochanan is of the opinion that chatzi shiur asur min haTorah. However, Resh Lakish thinks that chatzi shiur is allowed from the Torah. It's very interesting machloket. I mean, it applies to the whole Torah everywhere. So chatzi shiur would be then permitted from according to the Torah. So we answer Resh Lakish can agree that's still asur midrabanan. So that's sufficient. The Mishnah says that these 5 inuyim are asur. Eating and drinking is called asur because even a chatzi shiur is still asur midrabanan. That's why Yos says the word asur. But in fact, if you ate more than that, it would be in fact hayav. Okay, so now we ask a question on Resh Lakish. Ihachi lo nitchayev aleh korban shevuah. If in fact you think that chatzi shiur is asur midrabanan, Resh Lakish, then it's a problem. I mean, if we think that, if we use that as an answer, then it's going to be a contradiction with another source. The following source seems to suggest that, according to Resh Lakish, chatzi shiur is not asur, not even midrabanan. Let's see what the case is. Interesting case. Alama tenan. Shevuah shelo ochal ve'achal nebelot utrefot shechasim urmasim chayav ve'Rabbi Shimon poter. If someone makes a swear and says, I'm not going to eat. And then he eats things that are not allowed to eat. Nebelot, terefot, right? Things that are something that wasn't slaughtered, an animal that was going to die anyway, creepy crawlies, frogs, insects, all things like that. And nevertheless, their person is chayav twice, right? First of all, let's say he eats a frog. So number 1, because it's not kosher, and number 2, because he swore that he's not going to eat, and now he ate. Rabbi Shimon says patur. Now we understand the opinion of Rabbi Shimon because we have a general rule that en isur hal al isur. If something is already prohibited, it can't be doubly prohibited. If I swear I'm not going to eat this sandwich, so then that's one swear. I can't have another swear that I'm not going to eat it. Now anything that's asur in the Torah, we call that mushra ve'omed har Sinai hu. Right? We agreed on Har Sinai. We all said na'aseh v'nishma. So we already swore that we're not going to eat things that are not kosher. So therefore, if I come now and say, I'm not going to eat a lobster, so then that swear does not apply. And if I do eat lobster, I would be chayav only 1, the Torah prohibition, and not the extra prohibition. So we understand that. The question is, the Tanakh Kamau says chayav. Why? When we discussed that Mishnah, we asked, why Amai Chayav, according to Tanakama, why Chayav? Mushba ve'omed mehar Sinaihu. Since it's already prohibited, therefore the second swear, my swear now, should not apply. By the way, this is a very interesting concept, that we are obligated to the Torah because we swore, we agreed to it. In general, there's other midrashim that say we were forced, like the mountain was held on top of us, and so we had no choice in the matter. And that's one pathway, one group of midrashim. But a whole other group says that it was voluntary, right? That's it. You want to do it, and we said yes. So it's because we accepted upon ourselves. So really, the entire Torah is obligatory as a swear. Okay, so that is actually very interesting. Okay, so now what's the answer to that? So here we're going to have two answers. Rav Shmuel Rabbi Yochanan de'amre becholel devarim hamutarim ayim devarim ha'asurim. We're talking about a case where he includes things that are allowed together with things that are not allowed. For example, if I make a swear, I say, I'm not going to eat anything in the restaurant Red Lobster. If I go in there and I have a tomato, well, tomato's kosher, right? But I made a swear. So since the swear does apply to eating the tomato, therefore it does apply to everything. And therefore, if I go in there and eat a lobster, I'm going to be chayav twice for the Torah prohibition, and then another one for the swear. So that's the opinion of Rav Shmuel and Rabbi Yochanan. That's how they explain the Mishnah. But there's another way of explaining the Mishnah. Resh Lakish amar, iyatamose ela bimfaresh chasi shiur adibad rabbanan. Okay, the Resh Lakish says, no, the case, I don't agree with you that if you include things that are permitted within things that are not allowed, then it applies. Resh Lakish has a different answer. And he says, when you say in your swear, I'm not going to eat anything, not even chatzi shi'ur. If you say not that, then it applies, because according to the Torah, only eating a shi'ur of lobster would not be allowed. And then if I say I'm not going to eat anything, not even a chatzi shi'ur of lobster, so then it's more expansive, so it applies in that case. So that subcase could be in two ways, either according to Rabbanan. Rabbanan elsewhere in Shavuot say that if I make a regular swear, I say I'm not going to eat carbs, then that only applies to a shi'ur of carbs. And so therefore I have to specify, if I'm making a swear, that, I'm not going to eat even a chatzi shi'ur of carbs. Or it could be according to Rabbi Akiva, even if I don't add any stipulation, because if according to Rabbi Akiva, if someone makes a swear, then we assume it means even a tiny bit. I say I'm not going to eat carbs, even one bite of carbs, I'm not going to have. Okay, so either way, whether I have to specify it or I don't have to specify it, would be subject to that machloket. But the point for us is that according to Resh Lakish, you see here that chatzi shi'ur from the Torah level is permitted. And that's why, because the Torah permits chatzi shi'ur, that's why if I make a swear and I say, even a chatzi shi'ur is not going to be allowed, it does apply because it wasn't prohibited before. So now we have a contradiction, right? To summarize our question between two sources. Beforehand, we said, Resh Lakish says, chatzi shi'ur asur midrabanan, and that's how we explained our Mishnah, why he says asur. And according to this Resh Lakish's explanation of Shavuot, it looks like chatzi shi'ur is mutar, totally mutar, not even the Rabbanan. Okay, so that's our question. Now here's a possible answer. Maybe you'll say, yeah, really, it's asur eating that even a chatzi shi'ur of lobster is asur midrabanan. Nevertheless, the Shavuah can still apply to it, because since the level before was only drabanan, the Shavuah will apply a higher level to a drabanan. So that's the idea. Yeah, if it's doraita, then the Shavuah cannot come and add something to a doraita. It's superfluous. But a drabanan, maybe a cat can add to it. And that would explain both sources. But this doesn't work because of the following. There's something called shivat ha'edut. That means if someone witnessed a crime and they come into court and they say, I didn't see anything, and they swear, they say, I have nothing to say, I have no testimony, and they're lying. So then those person are liable for that lie. Now, this liability for saying a false swear that I have no testimony does not apply to someone who cannot testify in any case. So, for example, a woman cannot be a witness, and therefore, if she would, she doesn't need to testify. She can't testify. Or other cases, who would this exclude? It would exclude a king. A king also cannot testify. It's beneath the king's dignity to have to go into a courthouse and have to stand up, and right, he's beyond that. So even if a king sees a crime, the king cannot testify. Therefore, if a king would swear and say, "I didn't see anything," he would not be liable for that lie. Okay, that's one example. And another one, it also comes to exclude a gambler. Literally, kubya comes from the Greek word cube, same as English word cube, meaning someone that plays with dice. Not just mean playing tole. It means someone who gambles. Usually, here's actual a painting from ancient Pompeii. You see that people here playing dice and gambling. So a gambler cannot testify. So, and now here's going to be the essence of our proof. Really, according to Torah, a person who gambles can be a witness. And the rabbis, they came and said, no, gamblers can't be trusted. Why can't gamblers testify? There's really two explanations. One is because they're thieves. When people gamble, generally they think they're going to win. So when if they lose, they feel like, oh, you took my money, you stole my money. They really didn't relinquish that money willingly. So therefore, at least anyone who wins in gambling would be a thief. The other reason is because gamblers, they're not doing anything productive in their lives. And for the world, they're not holding a job. I mean, this would be a difference. Let's say someone does have a regular job, but they just gamble a little bit on the weekend. Then this would not apply according to that reason. But so anyway, since for sure, according to the second reason, the whole prohibition is only the Rabbanan. The rabbi said we can't trust gamblers. They don't know the value of money. It's more likely that they would come and testify falsely. But yet that's only the Rabbanan. And yet we say that the Shivu'ah, if a gambler would come and say, if a gambler sees a crime and nevertheless swears and says, I didn't see it, they are not liable. And so even though it's only the Rabbanan, and yet the Shivu'ah will not apply to that person, even though they're only pasul mid Rabbanan. So what you see from here is that in the previous case also, when you're talking about chasi shiur, I said I'm not going to eat lobster, even a chasi shiur, but the lobster was already assumed rabbanan chasi shiur. So really, it should not apply to the other one. So you can't tell me that shivuah does not apply to the rabbanan. That a shivuah would apply to the rabbanan, because you see in this case that shivuah does not apply to the rabbanan. So that therefore we still ask the question on Resh Lakish, and our answer is Shane Hatamda Markera Im Lo Yagid Ba'ila Bar Haggadah Hu Kelal. The pasuk regarding that shivuah of edut, the full pasuk says Nefesh ki techata v'shama kol Allah hu ed ora o yada im lo yagid v'nasa abono. If a person does not give information and he has information, he's subject to punishment. So since it says im lo yagid, that means if for any reason he cannot give the testimony, he is exempt from liability, even if it's only midrabanan. So this is an exception that applies to this case, that the shivuah does not apply, even though the problem is only midrabanan. But this could act as a good answer previously that Resh Lakish, let's summarize. Resh Lakish says that chasi shiur is asur, in fact, midrabanan. And that's why in our Mishnah it says asur, because it's assuming a case of chasi shiur, eating chasi shiur Yom Kippur, and that would be asur. That's why it says the word asur. And there's no problem with the other case of shivuah, because in that case, when he said, I swear I'm not going to eat even a little bit, that swear would still apply, even though it was only because it was only asur midrabanan, and the shivuah is a higher level. He is in fact adding a prohibition to something that was there before. Okay, good. So that explains the half shiur. Now we're going to get to the second answer, why it says the word asur. So first of all, we say, anush karet, lo tane asur. We assumed when we started this Gemara that if something is anush karet, then you wouldn't use the word asur. You have to say the word chayav. But is that true? Here's a braita that uses the word asur, even though it's clearly talking about a case of karet. Asur bechulan. Even though we said in the Mishnah, this is a braita that's commenting on our own Mishnah, even though it says the word asur for all of them, lo amiru anush karet ela al ha'ochel v'shoteh ve'oseh melacha bilvad. The truth is that karet only applies to eating and drinking and during work on Yom Kippur. All the other ones, if someone would wear shoes on Yom Kippur, even on purpose, that would not be karet. So you see in this braita, it says the word asur, even though it's talking about something that's anush karet. So maybe the word asur can in fact be talking about something that's anush karet. And we say no. This is the way to interpret this braita. We're inserting, really doesn't say this, but we're inserting. Asur is talking about a case of half a shiur if you eat. Aval kishior anush karet. But if you eat a full shiur, then it would be karet. Afapish anush karet and anush karet ela ochel v'shotev ve'oseh melacha bilbad. But that case of anush karet only applies to eating and drinking and doing work. Okay, so according to this just is a further explanation of the first answer, that the word asur in the Mishnah is assuming a case of chatzi shiur. But here's the second answer, which is much simpler and shorter, and I think is the pashat of the Mishnah. The word asur is going on the other four, right? Those are the ones that are asur. You can't say chayav because chayav doesn't apply to the other four. So you say asur, even though it's not completely accurate for the first one. Of course, we couldn't get to this answer until we introduced this concept here that only eating and drinking is asur karet, not the other ones. Anyway, how do we know this? The Tanur Rabba v'Rav Yosef b'shar sifrei devei Rav, because Rabba and Rav Yosef, they have a braita that comes from the midrash. The midrash from the times of the Tanaim, we call sifrei devei Rav. Nowadays, we use sifrei to refer to the midrash on Bemidbar and Devarim. When we talk about Vayikra, we call that sifra, not sifrei. Sifrei is plural. Sifra means ha-sefer, the midrash, maybe because it was learned first. In any case, and in this case, even though it's talking about Vayikra, and this is found in the sifra, it still calls sifrei devei Rav. It means that the word sifrei in this terminology can refer to any of the midrashim on any of the books. Okay, anyway, what does it say in the midrash? What's the source? How do we know Yom Kippur? You have these 5 inuyim. Because in fact Yom Kippur is called a Shabbaton. Now the word Shabbaton also appears regarding Shabbat. And when it talks about it on Shabbat, we learn from that the rules of Shivut. On Shabbat, there's 2 categories of prohibition. One is the 39 melachot, that if you do, one is liable. But there's another category of shivut, which is like climbing a tree, riding a horse, swimming or floating. These are things that are not actually creating anything. They're not technically one of the 39, but they're asur mishum shivut because they're not restful activities. Now the Sifra actually learns it from that word Shabbaton. Another midrash learns it from Kol Melacha. Either way, you see that originally, I think these are asur mideoraita, but they're not, since they're not one of the 39 melachot, there's no punishment. Okay, now we're going to have an analogy. Just like regarding Shabbat, there's 2 categories, things that are 39 melachot and have a punishment, and other things that are shivut and don't. So too on Yom Kippur, which is also, where it also says the word Shabbaton, it also says the word Shabbaton. We say that there's 2 categories of inuyim on Yom Kippur. One of them has to do with eating and drinking. That one is punishable. But there's another category where it's not punishable. So what would that apply to? That applies to the other 4 things. So this is a very interesting analogy. I think that the pashat of this midrash is that the other 4 items are still asur mideoraita, even though there's no punishment. Although this is a machloket rishonim, But I would assume that anytime in the Midrash, original Midrash, it does learn it from Pasuk, unless it says otherwise, it looks like that would be a Deoraita. Okay, good. So that concludes A. And now we're going to go back to this question of half shiur and give the reasons for them. So Gufa, we go back. Chasi shiur. Rabbi Yochanan amar asur min haTorah. Resh Lakish amar mutar min haTorah. Rav Machloket, Rabbi Yochanan says not allowed. Resh Lakish says it is allowed on the Doraita level. Now, Rabbi Yochanan amar asur min haTorah. Kevan de chasi de chazeh las tarufeh isura ka achil. So Rabbi Yochanan's reasoning is, since if I eat a little bit, a third of an ounce, and then another third of an ounce, eventually I'll get to a full ounce. So since it can be combined, so I have to say it's asur min haTorah. The idea behind this is that if you would say it's permitted from the Torah, then how would it work? Let's say I have half a shiur. Oh, it's permitted. Then I have another half a shiur. Well, this is permitted too, right? I mean, so how does it add up if the Torah doesn't consider it anything at all? Therefore, it makes more sense to say even a half a shiur is asur min haTorah, but no punishment until you get to a full shiur. That's Rabbi Yochanan's reasoning. Resh Lakish amar mutar min haTorah, achila amar lachamana peleka. Resh Lakish says it's permitted according to the Torah. Why? Torah says do not eat. For example, it says do not eat chelem, do not eat blood. Eating has to be an act of eating. It's not called eating if you just take one little bite. Right? It's only called an act of eating when you have a kezayit, and so that makes sense. Okay, so that's their reasoning. Now, question on Resh Lakish, who said that is mutar min haTorah. Iti Rabbi Yochanan Resh Lakish. Enli ela kol sheyeshno be'onesh yeshno be'azhara. In general, you have in the Torah to say something twice in order for it to be punishable, right, as to give you a warning and then also give you a punishment. And so Rabbi Yochanan says, I know that anything that has an onesh, there is also include azhara. In other words, if there's a punishment, then for sure it's also prohibited. Azhara would just be prohibited. If you only had azhara, it would be prohibited, but it wouldn't be a punishment. So koi, so now here's the question. Koi is an animal that is, we're not sure what it is. Is it a behema or is it a chaya? It's somewhere in between. There's different opinions about what a koi actually is. Some say it's a water buffalo. Some say it's this, a muflan. I'm not sure what that is. Okay, well, whatever it is, it's some kind of mix between a wild and a regular animal. Now, regarding chelib, fat, the prohibition of chelib only applies to behema, but does not apply to chaya. So that would make a difference between the two. So here's the thing. So koi, and also chatzi shiur, since they're not punishable, right? You don't get a punishment if you eat the fat of a koi or if you eat chatzi shiur. So I would think if there's no punishment, there's no prohibition either. Can it be that? Because is that true? Kol cheleb. The word regarding the prohibition of cheleb, the word kol comes to add at even that of a koi and even chatzi shiur is asur min haTorah. That's Rabbi Yochanan's proof that it's asur min haTorah. Look, I have a pasuk. The Midrash brought a pasuk for it, and so therefore we should assume it's asur mideoraita. Resh Lakish, what are you going to say about that? You said chatzi shiur is permitted according to the Torah. So why would the Midrash quote a word for it from the Torah? So it looks like it is actually asur. Here's Resh Lakish's answer: midrabanan ukra asmachta be'alma. Resh Lakish says, no, I think it's only asur midrabanan, and this pasuk that the Midrash brings is only a support. It's a mnemonic. It's a way of giving it extra authority. Really, the rabbis said it. And they just connected it for more support to a pasuk. Okay, this is a very important concept. If you look at every place it says this in the Talmud Bavli, there's a whole bunch of them. It never says it because the Midrash is outlandish, because it doesn't make sense. Here, it's a very straightforward Midrash. Kol, chelib. Kol is an inclusive word. He's not saying because it's not the Peshat, but rather it's the opposite. Because he assumes already that chatzi shiur is mutar min haTorah and is confronted with a challenge. So, since he thinks it's midrabanan, then that's why he says it's an asmachta. Okay, later on in times of Rishonim, like Rambam, for example, thinks that lots of things are asmachta, or Pashtanim say, if you ask them, hey, the pasuk doesn't really mean that. They say, oh no, the whole time Midrashim, a lot of them most of them are asmachta be'alma. Okay, but the Bavli, it's only used a few times. and only because we already know that it's Dirabanan. Now, good. Resh Lakish answered this question, and not only is he going to answer his question and say this midrash is asmachta, he's even going to bring a proof that it's an asmachta and it's Dirabanan. Hachiname mistabera. Makes sense. If in fact this midrash is deoraita, that the Torah is really coming to add the word kol in order to teach you that chatzi shiur and koi is prohibited min Torah, would that really make sense? A koi is something that we have a doubt about. We're not sure what species it is. But does the Torah have a doubt? Does God have a doubt of what is his creation, whether it's this way or not? No, the Torah would not have a doubt about it. So it wouldn't make any sense for the Torah to add a word about something that is a safek. And so since the word kol clearly is not pshat, is not doraita, therefore it makes sense for chatzi shiur also. This is only an asmachta, but it's a rabbinic enactment that would say this is prohibited, not in the Torah. Okay, so that's the end. That's his proof. Now we're gonna take away the proof, but Resh Lakish is still gonna keep his answer. Just he's not gonna have a furthermore. It makes sense. Now imishumha like idia. No, if that's why you're saying it, it's not true. Kasabre koi bidia bifnei because maybe koi is actually its own species. Right? It's not that it's a safek. Is it an animal? Is it a behema or is it a chaya? It could be a third species. It's like not non-binary, right? And so if it's its own thing, so it needs its own category. If it's its own category, it needs a special pasuk to say kol to include a koi, to include this koi. And in fact, we see in another place where that is in fact said. So he says in a different context that the word kol comes to include a koi. Koi sefecha hu istirich kara l'rbuye sefecha ella b'ryashane hachiname b'ryashane. So there also he says, wait, there's a pasuk where the Torah needed to add a word kol to add something that's not known. Okay, we don't know, but the Torah knows. Rather, it's its own species. Over there, the context is talking about blood. Now, blood is prohibited no matter what, whether it's a behemah or a chaya. And yet it says kol to say, yes, that's prohibited. Now, I wouldn't need something prohibited because I wouldn't need an extra word there because whether it's a behemah or chaya, I would know that blood is not allowed. I would only need a pasuk if it's a third species altogether. And this third species, I wouldn't know. So that's why I need the word kol to tell me that. So this is very interesting. It's not a behemah, not a chaya, it's a third thing. And so therefore, Resh Lakish does not have a proof that it's an asmachta, but he could still say it is an asmachta. Okay, excellent. And now we get to the third section, which is how come the rabbis assume only these 5 einuyim? Why not other things? We're going to give 4 different answers to why we don't say other things. So here's the example. Tenu Rabbanan. Ta'annu et nafshotechem yachol yeshib b'chama o b'sina kedei she'yista'ed. Since we have to make ourselves suffer, Torah says this in 5 or 6 times. It says these words to make ourselves suffer on Yom Kippur. So maybe you would say you have to go and sit in the sun and be very hot, or sit in the shade and be cold, so that you'll afflict yourselves. No, we're comparing it to the rest of the pasuk. The full pasuk says, so since those are back to back, we say just like not doing work is passive, right? By being passive, you're not doing work, and that's the right way to act. So too, the sufferings that we have should be things that are passive, right? We don't put on shoes, we don't anoint ourselves, we don't eat. And if you're going to say you have to go into the sun, so that would be an active thing, and it wouldn't be similar to melacha. Okay, so that's answer number 1. Now, hold on, I can still find a way of being passive in this way. Maybe if he's already sitting in the sun, and it's very hot, we say you have to stay in the sun. So that way it's passive, you're not doing anything, but you're still suffering by staying in the sun. Or the opposite, if you're in the shade and you're cold, so then we tell them, oh no, now you can't get up and leave. You have to stay in the cold and be suffering. And that would still be okay because it's passive. Literally, you're sitting and not doing anything. So we reject that and we say, no, just like melacha, you don't distinguish between different subcases of them. So too with suffering, you're not going to distinguish if it's going to be that you have to. And yeah, it's true. In some cases, you can just sit in the sun, but if you're going to apply it to all cases, in other cases, you're going to have to get up and sit in the sun. If you're going to say you have to be hot, right? So it has to be a way that you're always passive. And in this case, only half the time you'd be passive, half the time you wouldn't. Okay, so that's all one answer. Now, Tanya idach. תענו את נפשותיכם, יכול ישב בחמה בסלע ויסתער, ומדומר וכל מלאכה לא תעשו. מה מלאכה? דבר שחייבים עליו במקום אחר, אף עינוי נפש שחייבים עליו במקום אחר. וזה פיגול ונותר. Okay, so this is now a second answer. I'm going to show you. Well, the first one is that has to be passive. Another answer. How come we don't say being hot or being cold is one of the inuyim? We say there has to be something that's prohibited in another context. So we're also comparing suffering to not doing melacha, just like melacha is something that on another occasion you also can't do melacha, on Shabbat, right? So Yom Kippur then is similar to Shabbat in that you can't do melacha. So too, inui, suffering has to be something that is prohibited in another context, in the context of eating things that are not kosher. So therefore eating makes sense because there are other cases where you can't eat things. So what can't you eat? That would be chayav karet, pigul, and notar, different kinds of sacrifices that are overdue or you had the wrong intention, and those are prohibited. Now, this is a long midrash. It's going to end up, what the midrash is going to end up saying is that we prohibit eating anything at all on Yom Kippur, but we're going to go and see each different category. So avi pigul v'notar shehen bekaret, v'lo abi et hatebel she'eno bekaret, v'modoma ta'anu v'anitem et nafshotechem riba. I might think maybe pigul and notar, those are prohibited on Yom Kippur because they also have karet when it's not Yom Kippur. And so I would think I'm only not allowed to eat these on Yom Kippur, which means if I ate it on Yom Kippur, I would be chayav twice, pigul and notar, and because I'm eating on Yom Kippur. And maybe eating other things is okay, because we're making a comparison. We only prohibit things that because of suffering, and it's also prohibited elsewhere. I might think only that category, and maybe not tebel, which is not karet. Tebel was produced. I didn't take to the mama. I said. That's why it says another time. Ta'anu v'nitem nafshotechem riba. Remember I said it says 5 or even 6 times. So now this is, we're using another one. Now, abi tebel shubamita, lo bita nebela shena b'mita. Ta'anu v'nitem nafshotechem riba. Maybe I'll think tebel because that is nevertheless chayav mita. And maybe it would be okay to eat nebela. Even in nebela, an animal that died on its own, would be okay to eat on Yom Kippur. That's why now we're using a third ta'anu v'nitem. Fine, now we're going down the line. Fine, I would know that nebela is not allowed. Maybe chulin, which is regular food, which is, there's no prohibition at all, maybe that would be okay to eat. We're going to include that too. The truth is now we're even including things that don't even have a prohibition, but we're using the extra words to include them also. In other words, eating in general, right? We can encompass the whole category of eating. Okay, now we're going to go the other way from negative to positive. We talked about things that you're not allowed to eat. Now we're going to go even things that there is a mitzvah to eat. You're still not allowed to eat them on Yom Kippur. Tiruma is mitzvah for Kohanim to eat tiruma. And nevertheless, even though it's a mitzvah, I might think I can eat it on Yom Kippur. Now we have another time to anu to say no. Riba. Now tiruma, I don't have to eat it today. I can eat it tomorrow. I can eat it anytime. So maybe that is not allowed. But kodashim, which I have to eat today, I might think maybe because kodashim I have to eat today. I can't leave it to tomorrow. I would think maybe I have to eat that. I'm allowed to eat that Yom Kippur. We add that also. And so that's the derivation here. That's something that's prohibited in other contexts. Okay, that's the second. 2 more. Or if you want, I can give a third answer, Why? How come these 5 and not other things? Because the pasuk regarding Yom Kippur not only says karet, has another language, v'abatati, I will destroy. What do you mean destroy? So it has to be a type of suffering that would destroy a person's life. What is that? Eating and drinking. If someone doesn't eat or drink long enough, they will die. So it has to be something like that, and not simply sitting in the cold, which is not life-threatening. But now we ask, why do you need this third answer? What was wrong with the second answer? Because you might think maybe it's talking about adayot. That adayot is also something that is prohibited in other contexts. So you could say that is prohibited on Yom Kippur also. And so then that would be, instead of eating and drinking, maybe it's talking about tashmish hamita. That would also apply. So therefore, we need this third answer, nefesh, something that if you don't do it, if you don't eat and drink, that would be life-threatening. That's the third answer. And now, finally, the last one. Teneh debe Rabbi Yishmael Tana. Nemar kan ainoi v'nemar lehalan ainoi. Malanan ainoi re'abon. Afkan ainoi re'abon. If we actually just open up a concordance and look at all the places where the word inui says, it says in Devarim regarding the traveling in the desert and eating the man. It says, Hashem made Bnei Israel suffer and made them hungry and gave them the man, right? Which they had never seen before, the strange food. And so there is the point is that they were hungry. They didn't have all the things they wanted to eat. They wanted the fish and the watermelon and cucumbers. They didn't have that. So we learned from that Ainui on Yom Kippur is also talking about not eating food. Okay, that's actually pretty good proof. It's just looking up the word. Now, question. Once you're using the concordance, the word Ainu comes up another time. And this is when Yaakov takes his wives and leaves Lavan, and then Lavan catches up to him, and they make an agreement, they make a swear, they make a contract with each other, and he lets him go. And Lavan says, listen, I want you to swear, if you treat my daughters ill or take other wives. In other words, here he's saying that I don't want you taking other wives and then neglecting my daughters. So here we see that ta'aneh is talking about marital relations. In this case, ignoring his wives. So since it says Ainui, maybe we think that it would mean the same thing on Yom Kippur, that it's related to Tashmish Hamita. So we say no. Danin Ainui de Rabim, Ainui de Rabim, and Danin Ainui de Rabim, Ainui de Yachid. Now we're going to learn the context of plural from plural. The one in Bnei Israel in the desert, that was talking about the whole nation. Right, they were all. And so we're going to talk about Yom Kippur, which also applies to the whole nation. And we're not going to learn it from this story, where it only applied to an individual. So the one that has to do with food is the one that's more similar. Good. Then they left me. I know the Misraim. Why not learn it from another place, which is in Egypt? It also said, God saw our suffering. Ainui. Amrina. Now, what does this mean? This is from the Haggadah. Pesach zo perishut derech eretz. And this means that they abstain from marital relations. And so here, another source, similar to this one, maybe it means also on Yom Kippur, it's talking about Tashmish Hamita. That's what we learned is not allowed. That would be the main Deoraita one that would be punishable, and not eating and drinking. No. But this one was done by people. The Egyptians imposed on Bnei Israel that they could not be with their wives. So that is different. We want to learn something that Hashem does. And so just like the man and the desert, that was Bidei Shamayim, and Yom Kippur is also a law, Bidei Shamayim. Those are more similar. So that's why we want to learn those that are more similar to each other. And so that it gives us 4 different answers why we learn eating and drinking specifically, and then the other 4, and not other things like sitting in the sun or whatever. We learned that we know that's not true from 4 different ways. Number 1 has to be passive, like malacha, or has to be prohibited in other contexts, which eating is also prohibited, or something that your life depends on, or we learned it from the man, and all that has to do with food. And then just 1 more minute, we have a last agadah regarding the man. רבי עמי ורבי עשה, אחד אמר אינו דומה מי שיש לו פת בסילו למי שאין לו פת בסילו. The question is, what was so suffering about the man, right? They had food every day. Food fell from heaven. Wouldn't that be a great thing? You know, you get food delivery, free food every day. So why was that called suffering? So there's two opinions. First opinion is someone who has food in his bread in his basket is not the same one who has no bread in his basket. In other words, people want to know that they have some food in the closet, whereas the man, it was from day to day. They never knew for sure, are we going to have food tomorrow? Is it going to stop today? Are we going to have food tomorrow? And so psychologically, yes, the food was fine, and they got it every day, but psychologically, it was torture, never knowing where their next meal is coming from. And the other opinion is that although the man was fine and it gave them nutrition, it didn't look like anything, right? So if you can't see your food, I don't know if you ever went to the blind museum and tried to eat there, you can't see your food, you can't enjoy it as well. So yeah, maybe the man is delicious, but it doesn't look like steak, right? It doesn't look like sweet potatoes. And so because the look is not there, so that was the torture, that although they ate nutritious food, they weren't able to see the shape that it would look like, that it would be of what it tasted like. Good. Amar Rav Yosef, mikan remez lesumin shochlin ve'en sebe'in. From here we can learn that blind people, they eat, but they're never satisfied because they can't see their food. All right, well, I only tried eating in the dark once in that blind museum. It was very different, but I'm not sure if people are used to it, if that's true also. Amar Abayehil kachman de'it le'seudata. Therefore, when you eat, you're going to have a nice meal, you should eat it during the day. There's also, by the way, why we should light Shabbat candles, so that we have a nice meal and we have light, right? It's no fun to eat it in the dark. It's not enjoyable. Better seeing with the eyes than wanderings of desire, or maybe here means even going yourself. In other words, seeing is the best part of an enjoyment, even more than what it does to oneself. And we learn from the same pasuk a similar idea, that better is the sight of a woman even than the actual act of relations with her. So because the same pasuk, seeing is better. This fits with what we said a while ago. Remember when we talked about the rabbis who go and get a wife for a day, and we said there because the thought is worse than the act, right? And so this would make sense here also. Regarding a meal, that it's the seeing, right? When they bring to the presentation, I think we would say nowadays, right? The presentation is at least half the points of being a good chef, and even the actual taste and nutritious value. Baruch Adonai L'olam, amen, amen. Thank you, everybody.